So, Rich, the NFL schedule release, the NFL loves to draw it out, give us like a game here, a game there before the final reveal. Does that really do it for you? Do you care about that?
Look, I'm one of those weirdos. My dad and I try to get to a Jets game every year, so I'm combing through the 17 weeks. What's a good travel spot maybe? When is the home game we could possibly go to? So I am admittedly one of those people who is excited about all this content. What about you?
I mean, look, now that I'm becoming a best ball bro once again, it's time to memorize that week 17 schedule, baby. I'm JJ, and last year I tried my hardest to become a best ball bro. I drafted over 500 teams, I talked to some of the most successful best ball players in existence, and I admittedly had mixed results. So this year, I'm going to chase that title once again. My plan is to max enter DraftKings Millionaire Maker, and I'm going to document all of it while talking to the brightest best ball minds on the planet. Last year, I didn't quite get there. But this year, this is going to be the year where I officially become a best ball bro. Welcome into another episode of Becoming a Best Ball Bro, Season 2 of Becoming a Best Ball Bro. I'm JJ Zacharyson, and as always, I am joined by my co-host, Rich Ryan. Rich, what's going on, buddy?
Everything is fantastic. We're back. The Knickerbockers are en route to the Eastern Conference Finals. As people watching this on YouTube will see, if you aren't watching on YouTube, Late Round FF on YouTube. And even crazier than that, for the soccer folks out there, my beloved Tottenham Hotspur are in a European final in a couple of weeks. It's a great time for sports in the Ryan household.
Did you just speak English? I don't even understand what that that
the
meant.
King's English. The King's English, actually.
Technically, you really spoke English there. Yeah. I have no idea what the second part of that was. I'm a very casual NBA viewer, but I've been watching the playoffs. I think it's fun. I also was watching the draft lottery, and as a person who resides in the city of Charlotte, I was excited when they had a top 4 pick, and then I was not excited when they got the 4th pick. So that wasn't cool.
Hella rigged. Shouts to Commissioner Silver. Like, sometimes you just gotta get your hands in there and create narratives. And David Stern is smiling down from heaven today.
Yeah, I mean, my gosh. I look, again, I'm not as close with the NBA obviously as I am the NFL, but I feel like if stuff like that were happening in the NFL, I would be writing and doing podcasts about all of that just because it's so interesting and so fun.
Yeah, you'd be crashing out like everybody right now.
Yeah, exactly. This is season 2 of Becoming a Best Ball Bro. We're doing this again, man. Last year we did this. We didn't quite conquer things over at Underdog, but we are shifting priorities, shifting our focus. We're going to be looking at DraftKings this year. I'm really excited. Have you had any experience on DK in the best ball world, or are you going to be sort of learning with me and anyone else who's listening?
Admittedly, from a best ball standpoint, no. Obviously, from a DFS and even a sports betting perspective, anytime I'm back home in New Jersey, I'm firing up the DK sports betting app and getting some of those same game parlays in just for fun. But from a best ball perspective, this is going to be a maiden voyage for me. And once again, I love playing this role. I love playing the idiot sidekick who gets to ask all the questions that people in the audience might ask. So I'm here for it.
Yeah, well, look, I'm the idiot host, so I'm still, in the same playing field as you are. I'm really excited to be doing this on DraftKings this year. Just full disclosure to everyone, I have barely been in the best ball streets to kick off this season. I didn't do any pre-draft stuff. I just was really busy with some other things, obviously the prospect guide and stuff. But this year, as a lot of you guys know, I hired on David Kitchen, who's the COO at Late Round Fantasy Football. I'm going to blame Kitchen for my lack of best ball playing because, we've been planning. We haven't been playing. We've been planning some stuff, with Late Round Fantasy Football, and that's been taking up more of my time. Obviously, doing a lot of content as well, but I haven't been able to dig in as much as I would want pre-draft. Now that we're in it, now that we're doing this, I'm going to be max entering the Millie Maker. I am going to be playing a lot over on DraftKings. There's going to be live streams, over on YouTube like I did last summer, which were a lot of fun. I mean, that got to the point where it's cool to just see the same people hopping in every day and us having conversations, and we get into some weird stuff, not just best ball stuff while I'm drafting, because you can't, you can only talk so much fantasy football, when you're doing these drafts. But there's a lot coming with Late Round Fantasy Football and the content we're doing. But one of those things, obviously, becoming a Best Ball Bro season 2, and we're focused on DraftKings this year. Now, there is a difference between drafting on DraftKings and drafting on other platforms. You get a lineup that's 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 1 flex, and 12 bench. So basically, like the typical home league kind of lineup that you'll see there. The difference, though, is that a lot of other platforms will be playing half PPR. This is full PPR, which honestly, this is kind of the thing that I am better at, I would say, just because a lot of my analysis focuses on full PPR because that's sort of the default on a lot of the season-long platforms at this point. So I'm really excited about that. But look, you tally all that up, that's 20 roster spots, Rich, which means it's 20 rounds, which is on the longer side from a best ball perspective. And that definitely can change your approach. So I want to ask you, as someone who has a poker background, as someone who really likes game theory, is the 20 round difference, I guess, if you're looking at like 18 versus 20 or what have you, those extra rounds, what does that do for you? Like, what are some of the things that you might change up as being a complete novice on DraftKings and on with Best Ball? And obviously, I'll be talking to Best Ball bros and pros throughout the summer to get this answer and see how they approach things. But what's your initial thought on having those extra rounds?
My knee-jerk reaction as a guy who had a lot of 2 quarterback builds with JJ McCarthy last year is that, Rich, you've got no excuse to not have more 3 QB builds this season. That's my knee-jerk reaction. It gives you the opportunity to cushion the quarterback room and even the tight end room. If you want to go super late tight end, you might have an additional dart throw instead of having maybe the 2 that you had in an underdog build. But then once you start to bring up game theory, you can pivot away from some more traditional builds that might have those deeper quarterback and deeper tight end rooms and just really blast at running back or receiver. So like everything, and this is going to be an annoying answer, but as you posted this week on the late round feed, living in the gray, a lot of it is going to be draft dependent, right? The way a draft falls. If you have, a great quarterback room early for whatever reason, then you might just want to keep the leverage up and not go for a third quarterback. Same thing with tight end. If you find yourselves like last year where we were finding Bowers and a partner, in the late single digit rounds, so we really liked that build and didn't want to add a tight end, that might be an opportunity for you to go with a lighter tight end. So if anything, it just gives you a larger sandbox to play in and get a little more unique, I think.
Yeah, I do too. And the other thing to point out with this full PPR thing, I have this in last year's draft guide, and I'll put it again in this year's draft guide. I'm sure I'm still working on that. I'm just getting going on it, actually. But the one thing to keep in mind with full PPR, if you look at like the ranking of wide receiver 6 and an RB 6 and then RB 12 and wide receiver 12 and so on, you just add every 6 by 6 increments or increments of 6, if you will. Wide receiver in full PPR leagues outscore running back at every single level. So what I mean is, historically, this is since 2011, wide receivers who have been wide receiver 6 in season-long finish in points per game have averaged 18.4 PPR points per game. Running backs have averaged 17.9 PPR points per game. That's at running back 6. Running back 12, 14.9. Wide receiver 12, 16.0. All the way down the list. Literally, wide receiver outscores running back all the way down, which means just from an being optimal standpoint and how your team might utilize that flex spot, you have to imagine wide receivers are going to be, the position that you're going to target a little bit more heavily because they're going to score more points in that slot. And then the other thing I want to point out, and this is something that I don't think gets enough credit or love in the fantasy football space in general, but when you have a roster that gets more points from other positions and you're trying to optimize and score the most points you possibly can, there does become a point where the wide receiver position just scoring more points is going to have a greater power, if you will, over like a quarterback, let's say, right? Because they just generally are scoring more points and they're going to take up a larger chunk of that overall pie. Now, obviously, like value over replacement player, that kind of thing matters a lot more. But yeah, I mean, it's still a very, very interesting, switch and change going from half PPR to full PPR, depending on the platform that you're playing at.
You think about those spike weeks too. Whenever I close my eyes and think about spike weeks, it always tends to come at the receiver position. It always tends to be Amari Cooper, bazillion yards and multiple touchdowns. So the data meets my anecdotal analysis of what my eyes see as well.
Yeah, for sure. So look, that's basically like what we're getting into with this show this season is that it's now DraftKings focused. We are going to try to conquer the platform and beat best ball, which is not a very easy thing to do, nor should anyone think that that's really that achievable. But while doing so, I'm going to be interviewing similar to last year. Today's episode is a little bit different. It's just more of an introduction, but I'm going to be interviewing the best ball players on planet Earth to get their insights and how they've done well on DraftKings in the past. And hopefully I learn, Rich learns, and more importantly, all of you guys learn as I go on this adventure once again of becoming a best ball bro. But we're not going to end the show with just a 10-minute introduction, just talking about the rule differences and stuff with DraftKings versus other platforms. Look, man, I did my redraft rankings. I haven't published them yet onto the Patreon. I will be doing that this week. But I did my redraft rankings, my season-long rankings, and I then compared those rankings. This was just a quick comparison, just a high-level look. This is still May, but I compared those rankings to what I was seeing over on DraftKings and what ADP looks like on DraftKings. And I tried to find 5 players that my rankings seem higher on and lower on versus, the overall ADP consensus there. And we're going to talk through them. So, Rich, I'll hand it to you. You can kind of walk through this, and I'll answer any questions you might have about the players, because you have the players sitting in front of you, and I'll gladly talk through the logic and the rationale behind why I think they might be targets or avoids right now.
Let's start with a target, a player whose current ADP on DraftKings is pick 38.7, right there at the beginning of the 4th round, receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs. It's Rasheed Rice. Fingers crossed. No suspension that we're going to have to worry about this summer, and a team who lost DeAndre Hopkins over the offseason. And the only meaningful addition in that wide receiver room was a day 3 receiver in Jaylen Royals, one who my fellow Jets fans were completely apoplectic over us taking Arian Smith over.
Don't worry about it. You got Arian Smith. It's fine. Everything will be fine. Yeah.
But let's talk about Rasheed Rice, who's going in the same neighborhood as 2 elder statesmen, Devontae Adams and Mike Evans, and the guy going right behind him is rookie Travis Hunter.
Yeah, look, I actually really, really like Devontae Adams this year too. So I don't want to say that I would easily be going one direction over the other. I do think Rasheed Rice over like a guy like Mike Evans makes a ton of sense right now with that Emeka Egbuka addition that Tampa Bay had. But with Rasheed Rice, he was giving us high-end wide receiver 1 production last year before his injury. And even if he's not his usual self to start the season, I would imagine that things sort of turn around quickly. And at least by, week 4, week 5, and then towards the end of the year, which matters the most, obviously, from a tournament perspective and from a playoff perspective, I think Rasheed Rice can give us those wide receiver 1 numbers once again. There's also, you mentioned the possibility of that suspension stemming from that incident from last year, but Drew Davenport, who's a friend of mine, he's on he does a lot of legal related things for the NFL and for fantasy football to let us know like if a guy's going to get suspended, if they're not. He seems to think this could be more of a 2026 problem than a 2025 problem. And we know last year with Rasheed Rice, if you were in on him early, now obviously it didn't work out for Rice because he got hurt, but first month of the season, you were profiting hugely from Rasheed Rice being, having that depressed ADP overall. Xavier Worthy did have an uptick in production last year, but when he saw that uptick in production, a lot of it had to do with the fact that they were giving him more of those like lower A dot. He moved around the formation a little bit more kind of looks. He wasn't really being used as the deep threat that a lot of people assumed that he would play and that role that he would play when they drafted him. And so what I see though is that Rasheed Rice was out of the picture. We can't assume that Xavier Worthy is just going to pick up where he left off, because I think that Rasheed Rice is more of that target magnet than a guy like Xavier Worthy is. So I think Rice is just a really, really good slot guy. I think they drafted Jaylen Royals because they like what they have in Rasheed Rice and they wanted insurance in case a suspension happens or, an injury happens like we saw last year. I just think right now, getting the wide receiver 1 on this team, as late as you are, I think he should be ranked as a wide receiver 1.
There's folks out there listening to that saying, man, the Chiefs stunk last year and Mahomes stunk last year. One of the reasons why they had troubles on offense is because they didn't have Rasheed Rice. When Rasheed Rice was a part of the Kansas City Chiefs, this team was top 10 in EPA, 4th in success rate in the air. Rasheed Rice matters in this offense. So getting him back, getting him healthy should propel, yes, even Mahomes, even one of the GOATs, to better play on the field. I buried the lead. I'm being a terrible co-host because I should have led with this guy, a guy who's been a source of consternation for you. We're skipping to the next receiver. It's a guy that I've been told, JJ, that you hate everything about this human being. You wish all the bad things to happen to him. It's the sophomore in Chicago, Rome Odunze. But this is a targets list. What's going on here? You like Rome Odunze?
Yeah, I mean, shocking, right? That episode that I did on the gray area of fantasy football was not about the trade. You know I've already had a handful of people be like, "Oh man, he's just trying to rationalize a bad trade that he made." Guys, that's not what that episode was about. It was about thinking about in terms of range of outcomes. And that's exactly what this is about right here, is thinking about range of outcomes. When you're paying a wide receiver 20 price tag in Dynasty, you could go either way, but you don't have to buy into that as aggressively as I'm going to buy into it in redraft and season long, where right now he's where he's being drafted around that like wide receiver 37 range. My projections have him around that at like wide receiver 36. And I've mentioned that Mike Clay's, who I think Mike Clay is the gold standard for projection building. His is at like wide receiver 39, but my ranking for Odunze, because when I'm ranking players, I'm not just taking their projection and putting that in my rankings list. I'm looking at where a possible ceiling outcome could hit. And if I'm looking at a low end wide receiver 3, high end wide receiver 4 from a price tag perspective, I don't care about the floor, right? So my ranking is about 4 or 5 spots ahead of where ADP has Odunze right now. It's a situation in best ball also where I think you should give him even more of a bump, because if everyone stays healthy in this offense, right? Because you have DJ Moore, Colson Loveland now, Luther Burden now, Cole Kmet is still there. If everyone does stay healthy, it's a situation where it's not going to be super predictable more than likely. Like we saw that last year, with Green Bay, for instance, where they all kind of had lower target shares. No one really got over that 20% mark, at least but they would week to week, right? And those week to week spiked weeks can still happen in those environments. It's just not as predictable from a season long perspective. And so it's a little bit more difficult because you have to take on those valleys to get those peaks in season long. But in best ball, you can just get the peaks. And so with Odunze, talented player, new offensive scheme, I get the upside case. I've comped him to DeAndre Hopkins. I'm not going to get all into that. You guys can listen to that episode that I dropped on the gray area of fantasy football. People are going to think that I'm just bringing up Rome Odunze right now to make up for trading him away in a dynasty league. But guys, I like Odunze. I talked about that on the show. I think there's a bull case for Odunze, and it's going to be a lot easier for me to buy into that in a season long environment, in a best ball environment, especially best ball again, because I can just take on the peaks and not really worry about the valleys as much. I think he's a smash pick right now. And I'll even say Caleb Williams too is a smash pick. My projections have Caleb Williams comfortably in the top 8 at quarterback right now. So I just think he's way, way, way underpriced at the moment. Again, Dynasty would be a different beast because you're taking on the long-term viability that he might not be what we think he could be. But I'm just looking at ceiling, and Caleb Williams has some rushing upside. He gets Ben Johnson. The weapons are all there. Give me that all day long. So I love this stack of both Odunze and with Odunze and Caleb Williams.
Caleb Williams, 22 picks after Baker Mayfield right now on DraftKings, and Baker Mayfield is a pretty strong candidate for something you've been warning about for several years now, which is the pocket passer trap. Yes, we love Baker's weapons. We love his abilities, but if he doesn't have that touchdown variance, taking him 20 picks before Caleb Williams might not be the best.
I mean, look, Baker ran a little bit more last year, but it still wasn't to the point, it's not Jaden Daniels.
It's not going to be predictive.
Right. Yeah, but he also had Baker. So Baker comes out looking like one spot worse in projections. And I don't remember exactly how I had them ranked, but one spot worse in projections versus Caleb Williams. But the thing with Baker, and that might be surprising because, Baker gets Emeka Egbuka, Chris Godwin will be back, all that good stuff. Baker Mayfield's touchdown rate last year was absurd. And players with his kind of touchdown rate almost never repeat that touchdown rate year over year. So, I don't mind Baker. I still think he's a QB1, but I think that you could not easily, but I think you can make the argument that Caleb Williams is at least a better value for sure. But straight up, you could argue that he's just the better player in terms of ceiling projection this year.
All right, let's go to a guy who I think was on the Mount Rushmore of best ball bro players last year, in that we started the summer a little bit skeptical of this player, but then as we gathered more information, specifically from the team itself, who said that they wanted to get him more involved in the passing game, you came around on you didn't have take lock on K9 out in Seattle, and you grabbed a bunch of them at the end of the summer, and you're here again to tout Mr. Walker.
Yeah, so they don't have Ryan Grubb anymore at offensive coordinator, and I'm a little concerned they might not target their running backs at quite the same rate. I mean, last year on a per game basis, Kenneth Walker's target share per game was 14.4%, which basically like almost doubled his previous seasons that he's seen in the NFL. So it was definitely more of an outlier season for Walker as a pass catcher, but I'm pretty intrigued by Clint Kubiak being there. I just think that the ground game is going to be more of a focus. They did some things to improve the offensive line. I like his big playability, obviously, from a best ball perspective. And this just came down to looking at my ranking versus where, DraftKings ADP has Walker right now. To me, the reason that Walker's being drafted where he's being drafted is the injury risk. And I'm okay with taking on injury risk because it's a violent game at the end of the day.
Speaking of injury risk, the next fella is somebody you've perpetually been high on. He's been an incredible talent, and I'm looking forward to hearing the bull case for a player. I think I don't even want to name him, but one of the NFL aggregator accounts put out a list earlier this week of the top wide receiver twos in the NFL, and I don't even know what it was. It was no metric. It was just vibes, just straight vibes. And this player, I think, was in the low teens or 10 in terms of wide receiver twos. It's just outrageous. It's the man who does the penguin dance down in Miami. It's Jaylen Wadd.
So look, I know that I was in on Waddle last year, and it was a really bad call at the end of the day. But I also think that you can look at last season, and you can look at the other seasons that he's had in the NFL, and you can say last season was somewhat, if not a lot, of an outlier. So his yards per route run by year, okay, this is just his 4 years in the league. 1.75 as a rookie, then 2.59, 2.63, 1.53. Those are his 4 yards per route runs, okay? That's in chronological order. His points per game averages, 15.4, 15.3, 14.2, 10, okay? What season seems the least like the others? It's last season, right?
Things. It's not like the other thing.
That's right. And last season was a really weird year for this Dolphins offense. I mean, Tyreek Hill, didn't have great yards per run numbers either. And maybe Tyreek Hill is dust. But if Tyreek Hill is dust, then that's opportunity for Jaylen Waddle to just see even more volume in this offense. I think we can comfortably project Jaylen Waddle to have 110 to 120 targets. And then, like I said last year, there's still the upside of what happens if Tyreek Hill is injured. And I think that we would all agree that Jaylen Waddle would be drafted much, much higher than he is now. So there's that contingent upside. So I just think last season, I'm going to buy into this because no longer do you have to buy into Waddle with a premium pick. He's now more of a wide receiver 3 type. And if you're buying him as a wide receiver 3 type, then you can look at the ceiling and you can say, similar to Rome Odunze, you can say, sure, maybe last year is all of a sudden the norm. But if you look at last year, when he played games and wasn't banged up and stuff like that, and when Tua was active, he still was averaging like 13 PPR points per game. Like he was still, wasn't consistent, wasn't great. You don't have to worry about that consistency when you're playing best ball either. I think, look, Jaylen Waddle's a really good talent. He's always been a good talent, and I'm going to buy into that again this year.
I won't bring up he who shall not be named again, but it might sound like JJ is doing the thing where he's looking for the best aspects in what was a bad year. But we have to remember that just like he said there at the end, the price is very depressed from where it was last year. We were paying a premium for this player. Right. He was scrapping in that. There was that second round malaise last year where we didn't know who to put at the turn in the early second round. And he was part of that. And you're getting a pretty steep discount this year for Waddle. We talked about the wide receiver 35 earlier in Odunze. A couple ticks down. Jawan Jennings, wide receiver 38. We've got Deebo Samuel in the capital now, so there is less competition out in San Francisco. So let's talk about Jennings.
Look, I have no problem with like Ricky Pearsall either in season long and in redraft. But Jennings is coming off a year with a 2.26 yards per route run rate. He had 14 PPR points per game. He was the wide receiver 26 in PPR points per game. And situationally, I think things are better for him this year, where, you lose Brandon Ayuk for the first chunk of the season, more than likely, or at least he's not going to be 100%. You lose totally Deebo Samuel. They didn't do anything of substance at wide receiver in the draft that I really am concerned about. So essentially, and the other thing too, is that San Francisco's defense might not be very strong this year. They might be forced to throw the ball a lot in some negative game scripts, or at least neutral game scripts. And so I look at this situation as arguably a better one for Jennings year over year. Maybe we see some regression and some, not as strong of like a yards per route run rate, but I think there's a chance that he still sees a pretty strong target share in the offense. And he showed a ceiling off last year. He had some big performances last season. So I'll buy into this at a wide receiver 4 price tag. I'll buy into that all day long.
Let's talk about Deebo's new teammate then. He shipped off to the Capitol and is now with Scary Terry on the Commanders, and Terry McLaurin. He's actually someone you addressed with his dynasty value as well early on in the offseason. And now you're a little bearish on him heading into the best ball season as well.
Yeah, look, I love Terry McLaurin as a player. I mean, it seems like he's, from all intents and purposes, like his teammates love him. Like he's a really like one of the good dudes in the NFL. So I love having him on my rosters. Don't get me wrong, but I just see touchdown regression coming and hitting Terry McLaurin hard potentially this year. He had 13 touchdowns last year. His previous high in the NFL was 7. He had 4 or 5 touchdowns in his 4 years prior to last year. And his yards per route run wasn't special last year. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary for Terry McLaurin, which is good because he's a good player, but it wasn't like all of a sudden he had this like 3.9 yards per route run rate, and that coincided with a spike in touchdowns, and he just had this unbelievable season, and that's the way it's going to be moving forward. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, well, he got Jayden Daniels, and that's why his touchdown numbers increased, and that's why he had the best fantasy season of his career. Well, we've only had 34 seasons since 2011 where a wide receiver hit a 40% touchdown share. Last year, Terry McLaurin accounted for 44% of Washington's passing touchdowns. So McLaurin was well above that 40% mark. Of those 34 players, the only guys who did it more than once since 2011 have been Mike Evans, DJ Moore, Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, Des Bryant, and Brandon Marshall, right? So you hear all those names and you're like, okay, well, Terry McLaurin's a really good wide receiver. Maybe he belongs on that list. The only guy, though, on that list that's not a big bodied, like elite touchdown scorer is DJ Moore. And the only reason he was on that list in the first place is because he was playing on these Carolina teams that weren't scoring many touchdowns through the year to begin with. He was still only scoring like 7 or 8 touchdowns a year, right? And so if you look at like PFF's expected touchdowns formula, McLaurin should have been closer to like 7.7 touchdowns last year. He was 15th among all pass catchers in expected touchdowns. So, I do think Washington has a chance to get better in, offensively, of course. Jayden Daniels, another year in the league, et cetera, et cetera. But they were already top 10 in the NFL in overall touchdowns last year. So my question is, where are these touchdowns going to come from for Terry McLaurin to sustain where he's at? They're either going to come from Washington improving greatly on an already good number, or they're going to come from Terry McLaurin sustaining a relatively unsustainable rate. And I don't want to bet on that. So I like Terry McLaurin, the player. I would say I love Terry McLaurin, the player, but it's a really hard player to buy into where he's being drafted right now.
The additional challenge, as I look at ADP today, is that McLaurin is going with the 27th pick. Jayden Daniels is going with the 34th pick. That's top third, bottom third, which means it's going to be really hard for you to stack this combo as well. You're either going to reach at the turn, at the 2-3 turn, and get Jayden Daniels way earlier than expected, or you're just going to have to get lucky for McLaurin to slip to you if you're at the 3-4 turn and stack it that way. So that's another challenge that comes with investing in Terry McLaurin, is you're likely not going to be able to get him stacked with your quarterback. You'll just have to look for whatever that game stack is later on. Moving down the list is a running back who I would say you were lower than consensus on last year in your Derrick Henry renaissance when you finally came to the light side on King Henry, a player you thought would have a better season than Kyren Williams. You were just a hair correct about that one. I'll victory lap for you. It's Kyren Williams.
Yeah, look, I wasn't in on Kyren last year. Part of that was, again, because Derrick Henry was typically being drafted after him, and I just like Derrick Henry more than Williams. I think that might have flipped as we got closer to the season. But regardless, I'm just a little bit concerned about his drop in production that we saw last year, like efficiency, at least, alongside them drafting yet another smaller, similarly sized running back in Jarquez Hunter. Blake Corum obviously already being there, but Jarquez Hunter being a more explosive back. I don't think Hunter is going to step in and be the Rams RB1 this year. I just think it could be a signal that the Rams are once again being open to more of a split backfield. And look, I know that the same argument was being made last year to some degree because teams usually don't draft a third round running back to not use him at all and all that. But I would also argue that down the stretch, like before Blake Corum had that season ending injury, they were starting to use Corum a little bit more. Kyren Williams, to me, is just a very fragile asset. Like, I clearly see a scenario where he's like the RB7 on the season, but in a full PPR environment, I like him even less because Sean McVay teams have traditionally been bottom of the league in running back target share. And I shouldn't even say I say that as if like there are other teams that are close to how the Rams deploy their running backs as receivers. That's not true at all. Running back target share ranks over the last 6 years from Rams running backs from the whole backfield. Ready? 32nd, 32nd, 31st, 32nd, 30th, and 32nd. Like, they don't use their running backs as pass catchers at all since they had Todd Gurley. Then you add Devontae Adams to the mix. I don't see how Kyren Williams is going to have a better target share than 8 or 9% in his backfield. Like, that might even be more of a ceiling projection. So I just think he's a really fragile asset. Like, there's a lot of ways that this could go south for him. And I don't see there being a ton of ways where it could be favorable unless he just, lucks into a lot of touchdowns at the end of the day.
4 receivers he's going ahead of right now on DraftKings: Tyreek Hill, Garrett Wilson, JSN, Marvin Harrison Jr. Yeah. That is a tough group of receivers in a PPR format to willingly invest in a running back that the team, despite Blake Corum's failures, the team is telling you that by drafting another one, that there is intent there to bring guys into the room, have competition, and have some sort of rotation.
Yeah, and I mean, look, even if it's a 2026 thing, because Kyren Williams is a free agent next year, even if that's the case, which I think that's probably the bulk of the case, but you have another able body in the backfield, and that's still a little bit scary. Like, I think Jarquez Hunter is good, and that's driving some of this for sure, but you have another player back there that hypothetically could steal a little bit more work.
Go back to receiver, a guy who it was a struggle for you in the prospecting process. This Travis Hunter being such an outlier, clearly being an elite player from NFL standards. You had Jacksonville trading up a haul to go and get him. However, he didn't grade as well in your model as Luther Burton and Tet McMillan. But then you've got some of the tape grinders. Reception perception was off the charts for Travis Hunter. So let's talk about him down in Jacksonville.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, after he got the second overall draft capital, he did.
That's right. Once his draft capital got in there, that's right. Yeah.
He did jump up, and he was the wide receiver one in the class. But to your point, he did have questionable advanced analytics, just because there's a lot that we can explain away there. I think Hunter is the wide receiver one in the class from a rookie perspective, but I can't right now today. I think it's aggressive to have him at wide receiver 21, which is where he's being drafted. Projections have him closer to wide receiver 30. I'll rank him a little bit higher because obviously I want upside players. But here's my argument against Hunter, and this is something that I definitely want to chat with some of the pros about, is that this time of year we're probably going to have slightly sharper players playing, and I think that they're going to elevate rookies a little bit more than what we'll see later on in the summer whenever we get more of the casual player, which I'll say this again. I say this every year, but I'm not saying being a casual player is a bad thing. It's a healthier way of approaching all of this. So I'm not talking down on anyone who is more of a casual player. I'm just saying that the more experts in the arena, if you will, are going to like rookies probably more than the average player will, and I think that's probably driving up the Travis Hunter cost at least a little bit. So part of it is sort of that game theory. Like, I'm going to get Travis Hunter in drafts this year because I want the upside, but I do wonder if wide receiver 21 maybe he gets a little bit higher whenever minicamp happens and like he makes a great play or we hear more about his usage, whatever. But I think that there's a better chance that this drops than rises, over the next few months. Maybe I'm wrong though.
There's also the drumbeat volatility of, one would think that Liam Cohen and an organization that invested so much to trade up and get him, that it seems obvious that he will play a more integral role on offense than he will on defense. But we know how news and coach speak can drive these markets. And there is some left tail volatility if they come out and say that he is splitting time on defense, that he is taking up a bunch of reps on defense. So I do agree. I think there's a lot more downside to his value within the market than there is upside right now, because I think today everyone anticipates him to be an offense first player for the Jags.
Yeah.
Let's keep it in the great sunshine state of Florida with Chris Godwin, a player who in the absolute dredges of a garbage time game last year suffered a brutal injury and tanked several of my teams, including my most competitive dynasty team. Not that I'm salty or anything, but with Jalen McMillan, a year older into the league, with Emeka Egbuka coming to the folds, we're a little bearish on Chris Godwin.
Yeah, I mean, look, this one's pretty simple. I didn't even bring any data for this. This is more so I'm just worried about the injury and where things could stand, once the season starts. And I'm worried about Emeka Egbuka being there. This could change as we learn more about his injury, but that's where I'm just generally at. And then obviously, you have the Baker regression stuff I was talking about earlier and all that. But I just, the nice part is I think Godwin, we're obviously going to be playing for the playoffs, the fantasy playoffs and late season stuff. And I think Godwin will look better there. So maybe I would say he's like a loose avoid right now, not like a hardcore one. Again, I'm just looking at my rankings versus, what DraftKings ADP looks like. So this one's probably like the least bold of all of them. I'm just kind of waiting and seeing to hear more about what this injury looks like.
And then the final player that you were a little bit bearish on, going back to running back, is Brian Robinson. Now, we didn't see much competition come in. It was a 7th round pick on cross-key merit. It's still Austin Eckler, but it seems like all these commanders, you have to play Washington tax this year because of how explosive their offense was last year.
I mean, but what are people expecting with Brian Robinson at this point? Like that's my question. I know that I've been like not anti-Robinson, but I've definitely not been ever bullish on Robinson. But this is a full PPR platform. He's a top 30 running back when he had a 6% target share per game rate last year. He's never been above an 8% target share per game rate. And it didn't even get any higher last year with Austin Eckler sidelined for part of the season. Like it wasn't like what did Brian Robinson do last year aside from have a decent touchdown total and such to make you believe that he's going to have this massive ceiling this year? To me, the only way that happens is if you get an unsustainable touchdown season, which is obviously possible, but there's going to be other running backs in that range. And I'm going to want to buy in more that have, more of that upside, more of that ceiling. I'm going to be against, an RB3, a mid RB3 to high end RB3 at times. I'm going to be against that kind of player when that player doesn't have a target share ceiling. And I don't think that ceiling is going to be there, especially with a healthy Eckler. And also don't forget Deebo Samuel being there, I think could even hurt Brian Robinson a little bit. I hate having two commanders on the avoids list, but I think both of them are at least logical.
4 running backs going directly after Robinson right now on DraftKings: DeAndre Swift, Isaiah Pacheco, Tyrone Tracy, Cam Scatterbo. Obviously, you've got the ambiguous situation in New York that I'm sure will be divisive all summer. But the 2 players directly after him, Swift and Pacheco, please give me those 2 players all day.
What's the difference between right now, today, between Pacheco and Brian Robinson? Aside from Pacheco probably has weaker competition on his team. Pacheco probably has a higher target share upside, has probably similar touchdown upside, and has less competition in his backfield, in my opinion. So I'm not saying that I'm all in on Pacheco. I'm just saying that I think there are guys that are, like you said, right after him that, the Giants backfield, I'm not going to say either way, but I do think that a player like Pacheco and then Swift, obviously in a better offense, pass catcher, they might not add anyone. And even if they did, it's probably going to be more the early down bruiser to replace Roshan as opposed to DeAndre Swift. I think that there's more upside with those players than there is with Brian Robinson. All right. So those are my targets and avoids right now. Again, that's just based off of what my season long rankings are saying and then what DraftKings ADP says and just comparing the two. It's not the most detailed thing in the world that I did. I just want to compare it just to get like a little primer, like little glimpse into what's going on over on DraftKings right now. But Rich, we're gonna end this thing. Season 2, episode 1. Let everyone know where they can find you, and so that they can follow along your journey as well.
At Rich T. Ryan across all socials. If you want Jets opinions, if you want inane Knicks support over the next couple of weeks, that's where you can find me.
I'm on Twitter at LayRoundQB. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'm really excited to do another season of this show. It was really cool going to like places like the Fantasy Football Expo and people like saying that the thing that they liked most the last offseason and last summer was this show. So I'm really excited to bring it back. And I hope you guys enjoy it too this summer. So with that being said, thanks for tuning in.